going and moving towards particularly cost per visit model. Liz Basner is an old friend of MediaPost. She started with us going back to our mobile shows back in New York in the early days of mobile advertising, has been with us at some of our performance marketing summits in the past, because one of the things she's done at A&W is really move them towards more performance models of advertising and marketing, and in recent years has moved them towards a cost per visit model. And one of the things that's really driven them towards this is a partnership with a card incentives program that has helped them not only better understand where their media is going and how it's impacting people, but also the buying habits of their customers. Liz has been at A&W since 2011. She has experimented with almost every one of the digital channels, has led especially the social channel for years. She was there. Her alter ego was Rudy, which is the mascot of A&W restaurants, which tells me she's now passed on to others. She's an old friend of MediaPost, has spoken at a number of our performance media conferences in the past. Please welcome Liz Basner.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, it's interesting to think, I think it was 2013, and we were in New York and we were all talking about mobile because that was like the way of the future and it was so new, and it's just so interesting to think how far we have come in 6 or 7 short years. So perfect, step 1, don't fall when you get on stage, check. Step 2. Oh my gosh, the clicker works. We're in great shape. So thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I've already had some really interesting conversations with people. I'm obsessed with the Burger King presentation we saw this morning. I'm really psyched to hear Popeye's talk as well. So thank you for having me. So just to give you a little bit of a frame of reference, thank you, Steve, for the lovely introduction. My name is Liz. That is also me. I've been with A&W for 9 years. Prior to A&W, I worked in politics and nonprofit, and it turns out that working for a franchisor is exactly the same thing as working in politics. So who knew? I was very well prepared. I'm very passionate about data-driven decision-making, learning in food. I graduated from Vanderbilt University, and I'm currently pursuing an MBA at the University of Kentucky. So if you hear me say supply, demand, or elasticity, it is just a muscle memory reaction for a response that I think that I should have for something. So before we start talking about media, just to give you a kind of a brief overview of A&W, how many people have been to an A&W restaurant or had a root beer? Okay, great, wonderful. So we've been around since 1919. Last year we celebrated our 100th anniversary. It was the first time that a QSR had turned 100, so it was a very big year for us. And of course the challenge that everyone was talking about for 2020 is, what are you going to do in year 101? So in 1919, a gentleman named Roy Allen opened his first root beer stand in Lodi, California, June 20th of 1919, and it coincided with a citywide party celebrating the homecoming of local World War I heroes. In 1921, Allen partnered with an employee named Frank Wright, and they leased their first 2 root beer stands to other operators so that they could expand into the Sacramento area. And this was around the same time that the partners coined the new name A&W for Allen and Wright. Prior to that, they were just known as root beer stands. In 1950, thanks to the post-war boom and a lot of the GI bills and GI loans, there was a flurry of new development, and almost 450 operating A&Ws opened up. So if you are from a small town, you may have been to a car show that was at an A&W. We have a very strong tie to like cruisin' car club culture. And this is really where it comes from. We were opened up on the side of highways. A lot of our traditional units were drive-ins. And so there's a very strong tie with that car culture and our brand. In 1966, we had more locations than McDonald's. 2,500 restaurants were open between 66 and 1972. And then in 2002, A&W was purchased by what was then Tricon, became Yum Brands, as part of their new co-branding strategy. So depending on what part of the country you currently live in, you may have seen an A&W with a KFC or an A&W with a Long John Silver's. We've got about 100 of each of those type of co-brands remaining from our previous ownership. And then in 2011, A&W was actually purchased by our franchise organization. So it's a little bit unique for the industry. We are technically owned by our franchisees. And so all of our decisions for the brand are made in tandem with them. I'm coming fresh off of a board meeting from last week, and we have a really great relationship with our NAFA board. But all of our decisions that we make when it comes to the brand, to our marketing, to really any of our efforts to grow the A&W brand are made with our franchisees and not in a bubble. So as of 2019, there are about 1,000 A&W restaurants in the U.S. and Southeast Asia. And in 2017, that was a big year for us as well, because it was the first time in about 20 years that A&W had been actively franchising. So that's a new department that I've gotten to have some exposure to over the last year. Very interesting, franchise marketing versus consumer marketing. But if you know of anyone who would like to open an A&W, please do send them my way. We are selling. Okay, so enough history for now, but I think this is a nice piece of framework just to kind of align everything that we think about when we think about marketing. So for me, I'm our director of digital, so I'm very passionate about digital marketing, but really everything that we do is passed through this lens so that we can make sure that all of our efforts are aligned. We're a small team with a very modest budget, but it's really important to us to stay true to the brand, and because we are owned by our franchisees, it's only fair that we should be held accountable. So you'll probably hear that word a couple more times, accountability. And that's really where a lot of our cost per visit marketing originated from, and we're continuing to head in that direction. So we know that it's going to be very difficult for us to compete with brands that can afford to do value meals, that can have really low prices. We have some supply chain challenges as well when it comes to product, just because of where we're located. So for us, we really strive to have an authentic, organic experience. We want the service at our restaurants to be fantastic. We want the ambiance and the place to be really welcoming to our guests. And then we're moving in the direction of real fresh food. So probably the best concrete example of this is, as of a few years ago, if you go to any A&W in the United States, the root beer is made on premises. It's made on site. It's not bag and box. We've got this nifty little machine called an auto mixer, and our employees are actually making root beer on pretty much a daily basis. In some of our higher volume restaurants, it's actually more than one time a day. So if you've never had fresh root beer from an A&W, I would highly recommend that you check it out, because it really is a very quality product and you can really taste the difference. So when we think about marketing, we're 101 years old. So one of our challenges is that we have fans that span like every generation. Part of what I talked to our board about last week was I feel like we've been hammering the idea of millennials over and over again. Digital media and millennials, and digital marketing and millennials. Gen Z is now one of the consumer groups that we have to think about. So we want to do that without alienating our core consumer. Our bread and butter is still baby boomers. That was the generation that grew up with A&W. Anytime we travel and we have logo wear on, we'll see people at the airports. They talk about having first dates at A&W, their first job at A&W. The A&W in their small town was really the gathering place after high school sporting events and things like that. So we don't want to alienate those people, but it's 2020, and we have to evolve. So that's another piece of the framework and the lens that we look at all of our marketing initiatives through. So very exciting. As of 2019, 50% of our national advertising is now digital. And just to put that in a little bit better perspective, the first time we ever did any national digital advertising was 2014. I'm not going to tell you how much money we had. It was very, very small. I will be at a round table at noon, just as a side note, and I'm happy to give you actual figures and numbers. I will be very, very transparent when it is not being live streamed. But as of 2014, that was really the first time that we had done anything digital on a national level. And when I say that our budget was modest, that doesn't mean that our media budget was modest. It was production, it was the strategy, it was all of the creative, all of that had to come out of the same bucket. And so that was the first time that we had ever done anything online. And there was a couple of reasons behind that. One, everybody else was doing it, and we were sort of behind the times. But for us, we really felt that as a franchise organization, digital was where we could provide some value to our franchisees. A&W is unique in that if you go to a small town and you go through the drive-through or you go into a restaurant, there's a very good chance that the person who rang you up or made your burger is also the owner. And because of that, they don't have a lot of time to learn about the TikToks and all of the latest things that are happening. And so that's where we really feel a responsibility to keep our brand current and to educate our franchisees as to what is out there. The other thing that we can do is we can measure and we can target. So even though in the United States we have about 600 restaurants, most of them are in very small towns. I joke that our bread and butter is like Stop Sign, Iowa. It's very small places where there may not traditionally be the spots that you think of when you think about digital advertising. But 100% of our national advertising is geo-targeted in very close proximity around those locations. For the most part, it's within 5 to 10 miles. If you go to places like Montana, you got to go out a little bit further because there's no people within 5 to 10 miles of our locations. But it really allows us to be very deliberate and very measured in where we're placing our media. So for the purposes of the talk today, I'm really going to focus on our paid media and how that has evolved over the last few years. But we still are very cognizant of the other media types that we need to be responsible for. So we've got our owned media, we've got our earned media. Shared media is a thing that has made a pretty significant impact on our system. For a whole nother talk, I can talk about how we really cleaned up our online real estate in 2018 and 2019. When you have a brand that's been around for 100 years, imagine what our Google Map listings look like, because they were a nightmare. And it's really hard to go through and clean all of that up. But we really felt that it was our responsibility as a brand to do that for our operators. And also, if you're going to be placing money behind media, don't you kind of want your organic landscape to be in as good a shape as possible? Was sort of the thinking behind that. But for today's purposes, we will be focusing on our paid media. So of course, I'm in marketing. We have to throw up a funnel to show you all of the different things that we look at. But I think one of the bigger parts of my job is probably just explaining why we're doing stuff and why it's important and why we really need to be moving in these directions. So I won't read the entire funnel to you because we're mostly going to be talking about the bottom third. But of course, like every other brand, we have to think about our top, middle, and bottom of funnel, from awareness all the way down through purchase to the bottom where we actually have our brand ambassadors and our influencer program. So it's now not even enough to just sell to people. You have to turn people into your advertising advocates. It is fascinating. It is one of my favorite parts of the job as we continue to add layers. Every year, this funnel gets a little bit bigger. But it's also really challenging. It's really hard being a digital marketer. There's a lot of stuff that's going on, and you have to be responsible for your brand at every single level. So some of the challenges and considerations that we have for our paid media, a very modest budget, and with that comes the limited ability to test. For us, our sales cycle is an incredible bell curve. We actually will sell twice as much food in July as we will in December or January. We still have about 40 locations that are seasonal, that aren't even open in the winter. We still have 6 restaurants that are cash only. And you'll see here in a couple of slides how I found that out, because we were doing some credit card linked marketing and I was driving myself insane because there were 6 restaurants that weren't seeing any results. So that was like my very, very boring Nancy Drew crime solving novel when I got to the end of that. I was really jazzed. Nobody else in our office was excited at all that I had solved that mystery. But we have limited ability to test. Traditionally, we focus most of our marketing in spring and summer because that's when we're selling food. But because of that, we often have to wait 9 or 10 or 11 months to take some of our learnings and apply them to the next year. And as you know, with digital media, 9 or 10 months may as well be 9 or 10 years often. So for us, our test is also our campaign, and that brings its own fun, unique challenges. We have no centralized or unified POS. Like I said, we have 6 restaurants that are cash only. We have 1 restaurant that does not have a computer. I have not seen it, but I have heard multiple eyewitness accounts that this is true. And then we have everything up to the latest and greatest. So for us, we can't be limited by the fact that we don't have a centralized POS, because that's simply not our reality. The other thing that we have to take into consideration is that we have multiple asset types. So from previous ownership, we still have about 100 restaurants that are co-branded with a KFC, about 100 restaurants that are co-branded with a Long John Silver's. And at KFC, we don't sell chicken because that's kind of their thing. And the same thing with Long John's. We don't sell any fish products in Long John's restaurants. So a lot of times, our promotional calendar is very fractured, and we might be selling 3 different things in 3 different asset types, and there's not really a rhyme or reason to geographically where these are located. So your budget is limited, you don't have the ability to test, and now you've got to promote 3 different things. So all of those are things that we have to keep in mind. There's also limited knowledge within our system. So our franchisees have gotten an awful lot better over the last few years, but traditionally they're people who really like to support their local sports teams, and they have relationships with billboard companies in their towns, and they've been doing printed coupons for a number of years, and for most of them it's been working really well. So when we go to them and say, hey, this is how we think you should spend your money, this is why we should invest in Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever it might be, we always want to make sure that we have very solid reasoning behind that. And the best way to do that is to prove that it can make money at their particular location. Which really leads me into the last point, which is that our results should really be geared towards restaurant level reporting. Our franchisees deserve to know where their marketing dollars are being invested. And if you're a franchisee who has a restaurant in a small town in California or Wisconsin or Michigan or Iowa or wherever you are, if I can go to you and say, hey, this is what I think we could turn your marketing dollars into, here's the bottom line, that's much more powerful than saying, hey, I think that we should be on Instagram. So a quick little side note, because I want to focus the majority of what we were talking about on cost per visit, but it is really important also to be on social media. We're still all talking about social media, and I think it still plays a really valuable role. Cost per visit marketing is like not necessarily the sexiest kind of marketing. There's no videos that go with it. There's no creative. You're not talking about a product. It's all data driven. And so to me, I think social media is still where we can have a lot of fun. And there's some great brands in this room who have definitely proved that. But at the end of last year, NetBase came out with a report, and they had ranked all of the QSR and fast casual restaurant businesses in terms of how they were performing on social media. And for us, we came in at number 1 for consumer brand sentiment. We were above Chick-fil-A. We were above Taco Bell. And for us, that was really, really powerful because we do all of our social media in-house. That's not outsourced. We don't run that through an agency. All of our consumer conversations that we're having are coming from the brand. And that's something that we really put a stake in the ground a number of years ago to say, hey, if anybody's going to be talking to our fans or our consumers about A&W, it should probably be A&W. So I always like to include this because I think that sometimes we can get a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of stuff to do and the amount of money that it takes. And quite often you can actually find some pretty successful results. It just takes time. So moving on to card-linked marketing. So the way that we got to our cost per visit platform really started in 2018. In 2017, I was at another MediaPost event, and I was presenting on what was going to be the way of the future for A&W's digital marketing. And we had done an experiment with some device ID targeting. And so we were able to actually track our consumers with their mobile devices when they were going to competitors, showing them A&W ads, and then showing that they came into a restaurant. And technically, it worked very well. The one thing that we didn't necessarily consider was that it was not a traffic driver. This was a data measurement tool, and no one cares how much data you're measuring if you're not making more money. So that was a lesson that we had learned. So we were really looking for something that we would be able to see on a per restaurant level that would show that for X amount of marketing dollars, this is what the return is. And so we did a very modest little pilot with a company called Cardlytics, and they are a true cost per visit platform. So if you have Bank of America, Chase Bank, Wells Fargo, or a number, I think they have 2,500 other banks that they work with, the offers section, when you log into your bank account, will show you things that you're probably interested in, and then a cash back offer if you use your credit card at those places. So Cardlytics is one of the companies that powers programs like that. So to be perfectly honest, I did not think that this was a super exciting program. I was not sure that a 5 or a 10% cashback offer on a $10 check would be that compelling. And fortunately, I was very wrong because it worked quite well. So one of the good things about card-linked marketing is that it's really what I consider to be a no-waste marketing effort. There's no merchandising or production needed. You need a logo, you need a couple lines of copy, and you need people to accept money for food at your locations. And those are really the only things that are standing in your way from executing a program like this. So there's no need to train staff. There's also no discounting that happens at the restaurant. All of this goes on behind the scenes, and all of the transaction information is handled between the consumer and the bank. The brand really doesn't have anything to do with it. The other great thing is that results can be measured on a regional, DMA, and per restaurant level, so that when our franchisees come to me and they say, hey, I invested X amount of dollars in this program, I can pull up a massive spreadsheet that I have right now and actually say, hey, in January, this is how much you made. In February, this is how much you made. And we can then start to draw some conclusions based on their sales, based on the other marketing efforts that they were doing, and really start to show some trends. The other thing, and maybe my favorite thing about card-linked marketing, is that you get actual real-time insight into your consumers. It's not just industry-level data. These are actually people who are going to an A&W. So last year, if you went to an A&W in January, there's a good chance we paid for that very first visit. But if you came back subsequent times throughout the year, we now have access to your purchasing habits without having to pay for those subsequent visits. So we get to learn super cool stuff like this. So for us, we work with very little data in terms of how frequently our consumers actually shop with us. Like I said, we don't have a unified POS system. We cannot see transaction level detail for the majority of our restaurants. So we have to go elsewhere to figure out how people are really interacting with our brand on a transactional level. So here you can see this was a summation of all of 2019. And we found out that if you're a frequent A&W user, we're going to see you about once every 40 days. You're coming in 5 times a year. And in terms of this card-linked marketing program, we spent just under 29% of the budget for that program on our heavy users. Annually, we're looking at someone who is a hardcore A&W fan, spending about $123 a year, with an average check of $13.11. And then if we move towards the right side of the slide, you can see for a light consumer, we spent about 56% of our budget targeting these folks. On average, they spend about $16.88 a year with our brand, and their average check size is $14.43. So now that we really have this baseline framework to go off of, we can use these as benchmarks and start tracking our consumers over time and really seeing how they move up and down the loyalty ladder. And I think it's much more powerful when we show things like this to our franchise community and say, hey, we're really trying to move our orange fans to dark blue fans, and then get in new orange fans as well. So if we can quantify with actual data that a heavy A&W user spends $123.75 a year, I think all of that information starts to become much more concrete and is easier to wrap our heads around. The other cool thing that we get to see is brands that we're taking share away from. And so on the left-hand side, you can see these were the top 3 brands that we had taken share away from. And on the right-hand side, these are our challengers. These are other brands that our consumers are actually spending money with. And this was interesting because, much like every other restaurant brand, for the last, it feels like very many years, we've been talking about delivery and whether or not we should get into delivery. And for me, when we saw this data, it doesn't really matter what your personal opinions on delivery are, because that's where people are spending their money. And here is a chart that shows you how much. We've only been working with this company for about 18 months now, but we've already been able to glean some data from a program like this that is driving traffic, that is driving revenue, that's also giving us really some things that we can use to inform other levels of our marketing as well. It's not perfect. There are challenges with visit-based marketing. One of them is that there is very limited real estate to share any sort of product description. Most people are interacting with their bank on their phone. And if you open up that offers tab in your bank, you've got like this much space to show a logo and a cashback offer, and that's basically it. So we've got some really exciting new products coming out this year. This is actually the most new products that we've launched in over 10 years. And there's really not a space on this particular platform to talk about those products, which is where things like social and email and video marketing really come in to supplement. There's also nothing for franchisees to see, feel, or touch in restaurants. So I think as like digital marketers, that's the biggest challenge is we're not shipping you anything. There's nothing that you can hang up in the store. There's nothing that your team members can put their hands on. And it is a confusing conversation to have sometimes to explain to people what this program is, for them to ask when it's getting implemented, and for me to say about 18 months ago. And so there are benefits to not having any sort of merchandising or POP in the restaurant, but also some challenges because sometimes it doesn't really seem real. And then timely reporting can be very difficult. So I have this illustration printed out and hung up in my office. That's the data monster. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people who are dealing with this. And we're not just getting it from programs like Cardlytics. So one of our biggest challenges that we've given for ourselves for 2020 is how can we report all of this information in a more timely manner, not only to our field growth trainers, not only to our board members, but to our actual restaurant owners, so that they can make better informed decisions about the marketing that works for them. I have broken 3 different kinds of Excel. I've moved into Tableau because it's too much data. But we're starting to combine some of the visit-based metrics that we're getting with sales data, with some of the print coupon data that we're getting, to really try and build a more robust narrative around how all of these pieces are working together. So I think that's going to be a challenge that a lot of people are facing as we start collecting more and more data. We launched a delivery pilot about 2 weeks ago, and so I know that we'll be getting some more insights from that as well. But really, how do all of these pieces work together so that we're telling the best brand story and also using our dollars the most wisely? Any questions?
Thank you so much, Liz. That was really detailed. As always, Liz always delivers really detailed presentations. Any questions of Liz?
You mentioned cost per visit. Sorry, Mark Young, GSCV. I guess we are a sponsor. Go. 2 cents. Even better. You mentioned cost per visit. How are you guys? I didn't see any cost per visit metrics.
I am happy to share that at the roundtable.
Roundtable.
I will tell you that we got
I'll share ours too, so it's good.
about a 16-to-1 ROAS,
Nice.
Which was the highest that we'd seen. For us, if we can get a new consumer in our restaurant for $1.75 or less, that tracks. We can make money on those particular visits, depending on how much the program costs. And so for us to be able to see, this is how much on average it costs for a new consumer to come in versus a lapsed consumer, and then we can start drawing some information and conclusions from those.
Perfect, thanks.
What was the major impact on your media mix so far from the data that you're rendering from this?
Well, for 2020, I can share that the majority of our digital media budget, it's about 75% of our overall media budget, is going towards card-linked marketing. One of the questions that I got last week from a board member that I think is a valid question, and also just sort of like the marketer's dilemma, was a couple years ago this was new. And now there are an awful lot of brands who are jumping on board, which is great, but I think that's also just sort of like how advertising works. At one point everybody was doing print media or everybody was doing television, and so the question that I got was, what's next? What are you gonna do when this stops working? I don't know, but conferences like this are great to get ideas of what's working for other brands. But that has been a question that has been circulated to our marketing team, is this seems great, now what's next?
And Liz is going to reveal even more in her roundtable at the end of the morning. Liz, thanks so much.
Yeah.
So we're going to continue on this theme of data-driven marketing and advertising, and the idea and the problem of execution on all of this. When Ryan Murren joined Panchero's Mexican Grill from Chipotle, he had quite a to-do list ahead of him, and it included things like how do you relaunch the brand in a data-driven and digital-first way? How do you communicate with many franchisees who have their own programs? How to standardize around a particular social-first approach? How do you relaunch an app so that it matters? Spoiler alert: some of this involves queso. Please welcome Ryan Murren from Panchero's Mexican Grill.
Thank you. So as Steve mentioned, I'm going to talk about kind of our journey on how we thought about our digital transformation. The good news was we had a lot of good foundational pieces in place. But through everything that we were doing, we really drove the business. So first I'll start with, if this is working, maybe not. There we go. So what the hell is a Panchero's? So it's a burrito joint. And that's as simple as it is. We are a founder-led brand with 70 locations, started at the University of Iowa. We make burritos, tacos, salads, quesadillas, and bowls. But really what sets us apart is our approach to simplicity. So we make everything in every restaurant from scratch every single day, including the tortilla as you order it. So we make fresh dough. As people come up, we press a dough ball and put it on the grill. And it is a significant difference in taste and experience and the smell and just everything. And then we also mix everything before we roll. So we want to make sure that if you have sour cream and chicken and black beans and everything, you don't get a mouthful of rice or sour cream, that you get a little bit of everything in one bite. And so the slide that should be here is, who the hell am I? I spent 15 years at Chipotle. Before this, had the good fortune to come on with Panchero's as the VP of Marketing in August. I was leading advertising, the CRM and loyalty program for Chipotle, integrated marketing insights. So I had a lot of good kind of foundational knowledge about selling burritos, which helped. So we have a great, super loyal, super passionate fan base, and all of these are unsolicited. Photos, images from our customers telling us how much they love us. We had one kid in his high school yearbook, his quote was his order at Panchero's. So, part of what we wanted to do, we knew we had this super fanatic fan base, and we wanted to unlock that a bit. So, when I started in 2018, we had the app that we had launched on a Punch platform. So we had a great kind of starting point for the app. We had the loyalty program, which was very simple intentionally. We try not to get in the way of people getting what they want, ordering. So those two pieces we had set up, and we just needed to leverage them. We also had advertising campaigns that we'd produced different assets over the years and kind of melded them together, and you could tell some were newer, some were older. And looking at our restaurants, we're 70 restaurants in 13 states and 28 DMAs, and really we should have been digital first in everything that we were doing. So we started a project with our ad agency to create a social and digital first campaign that I'll show you. We also relaunched our social channels, so we hired our first social media manager. We started developing a tone and a voice and a cadence of posting. We also had a lot of guest feedback coming in. So we have, I'm sure like everyone here, we have like 20 different channels that people talk to us through. And they were not connected at all. They weren't influencing everything else that we were doing. We had a lot of reviews coming in on Yelp and Google and Facebook that again we needed to respond to. We found out that like any restaurant brand, people find out about your restaurant by going to Google and Yelp. And lastly, we had a couple sales channels that we had introduced or were testing that we needed to leverage. So we had online pickup through the app. That again, it was doing okay, but it could have been doing much better. And we were testing delivery as I came on board in August. So what we needed to do was weave all these things together and think about all of these pieces as working together. So one thing that we did, and we're 70 restaurants, our budget is very modest. So we actually pixeled our site with Quantcast as a way to dig into who our guests were, let it run for 90 days. And literally I read every single page on Quantcast to develop this view of our guests. And what we found was our guests are tech-savvy pragmatists, so they're not the early adopters, but they are using technology to manage their life better. So they index highly for online ordering, for loyalty app usage. They index highly for cord cutters and streaming audio. They're also researchers, which meant they like to be informed about where they're going to go. They like bargains, so that's important to them. And then our guests are frequent diners, and they're very promiscuous, meaning we get a little bit of share, and that's a huge opportunity for us. So 12% of our guests were spending more than $5,000 on QSR. So one of the things that, as we started thinking about this, that informed how we approached the strategy was really designing around the customer journey. And if you think about how most people experience your brand, it starts in mobile. And so this was kind of a framework for us as we started to connect the dots between all of the pieces and parts to what we were doing. So creating awareness, how do we do that in social and digital, geo-targeted to all of our 70 restaurants? Creating consideration, some of that lower funnel activity with search, linking into our app so that people can complete a transaction. Driving preference, so creating and posting in social media so that people are used to seeing us. And then responding in these platforms like Yelp and Google so that we can create loyalty and advocacy, and hopefully all of this drives a virtuous cycle. So the more you have your loyalists talking about how great it is, the more it creates awareness and consideration, etc. So we started with the app because the app was kind of our foundation. One of our key metrics is participation rate. So for some of you that have Punch, we leaned on Punch quite a bit for best practices and what we should be doing and how we were compared, with other brands. And one of the key metrics is participation rate. So how many of your transactions overall are flowing through your loyalty program? So ours, when we launched it, it was fairly strong. We were at 15%, but it declined because we really didn't put a focus on it. We didn't have programs designed for the app. We weren't really using loyalty as a CRM platform. So downloads were flat. And we were essentially treating all of our guests the same way. So we weren't talking to the high frequency, high value guests differently than we were talking to someone that had been in one time. And then most of our check-ins were at point of sale. So 2/3 of our transactions through loyalty were people coming in and scanning, which meant it's essentially for the loyalists, and we wanted to change that. So what we did is we established 3 priorities for the app, and very simple, make it relevant. So start to segment our guests, treat them differently if they are transacting differently, which led us to building behavior-driven campaigns. So, if someone is getting queso all the time or chicken or comes in on Sundays, let's talk to them differently than someone who signed up for the first time and hasn't transacted. And then more importantly, let's make our app a communication channel. So, our, philosophy was if people have signed up and opted in to hear from us, we owe it to them to communicate new things that are going on other than just discounts in the app. So make it relevant, make it useful. Make it have a reason to sit on their phone. So we needed to fix the order flow, some foundational stuff in our app. We also needed to make it more visually appealing, more food-driven, showing what they could order by clicking on it, and then introduce delivery. So that was another way to make it useful for people. And then for the first time, we introduced tracking in the app. And this is something that we had launched without, so we didn't have in-app tracking. And we engaged Coachava to make sure we're tracking events in the app. The other priority was make it central, make the app central to marketing. So don't treat it as a standalone sales or communications channel, feature it in our advertising and social, start to build campaigns around it. And going back to our fans, let's leverage our fans to help them communicate, hey, you should download the app to their friends. Our referral campaign or signups were already fairly strong with almost no effort towards it. So we figured that was an opportunity for us. So where we started, and all these things kind of start at the same point, but the outcome is staggered throughout the year. But in February, we started doing more app campaigns. So segmented campaigns, treating people differently based on their behavior. So starting to do double points campaigns. Once we launched delivery, we're doing free delivery. For someone that hasn't ordered delivery in a while, kind of incentivizing them to do it. We also started doing compression campaigns. So our program is very simple. It's 100 points and you get a free burrito. And so as people got closer to halfway or 85 points, we're just triggering a message saying, hey, you're so close. We also in April launched our first truly integrated social first digital campaign. And this was, we tested a couple concepts. One came out as a winner. But really this was designed for our franchisees that, replacing ad spend for one restaurant that may be spending $10,000 or $15,000 a year. And it's a ton of money to them. And we wanted to make sure that it was the most effectively addressed to their customer as it could be. So our strategy for advertising was win the neighborhood. Don't try and build reach in a market. Don't try and get as many people as you can. Let's create perceived reach in that 3-mile radius around your restaurant. So in May, we introduced delivery, and we've been testing it in 13 restaurants. In May, we introduced it through the app. It was supported through paid media, in-store, in-app messaging, PR. And what happened was the delivery launch resulted in sustained incremental sales, but it also had a couple other effects. So one was our online ordering increased at the same time that we launched delivery. So people got more accustomed to multiple order channels. So that increased. Our participation rate increased by almost 20% within like a week of introducing delivery. And our app downloads and signups almost tripled during that time. So we're like, we have something here. We need to continue iterating on this. So in the works, we also had review management and customer satisfaction. And this is really a joint effort between franchisees and operations and marketing to make sure that we were responding to identifying people that were leaving reviews online if they were a loyalty customer and responding to them in loyalty and, again, talking to them differently. And then replacing a secret shopper program that we'd had for a number of years with a true like voice of the customer that we'd never had. And then within the app, messaging people to tell us how we did. So, creating that virtuous cycle of more feedback, the sense that we're listening, improving, et cetera. So after the delivery launch, when we saw this huge increase in sales and participation rate, we really dug into like how do we create a campaign that is truly like an app driver for us. So they have these silly holidays like National Bread Day or National Queso Day, and we were kind of brainstorming, and I think our social media manager has suggested doing a post for National Queso Day. And that became a fully integrated campaign from that point. And it started with, again, simplicity is important, just free queso on the entree, in the app only. But to leverage it, we dug into our loyalty program and found 8 people that had ordered queso more than 200 times in 12 months. So we were like, we definitely have something here. So we found our king of queso. His name is Kyle Trotter. He lives in Davenport, Iowa. We stalked him in a nice way to surprise him with the first ever queso cup. So we went to the auto dealership that he worked at. We presented him a trophy. We fed the entire dealership. We got a lot of PR off of this, and we made a leaderboard. So we're coming back to this as a campaign that we're going to do year after year. And what happened was this one promotion, which we spent very little money on, drove a 6% comp during that time. We got a 506% return on investment. We figured we got 1.1 million in new customer lifetime value, meaning we got a bunch of new signups. We understand how much they're worth. Signups increased 40% during the promo. And more importantly, after the promo, signups stayed higher at 8% after the promo. So then we launched the app update, and this is something we'd been working on since 2018, but finally had it ready. We fixed some of the order flow issues. We made it more visual. We reshot all of our photography so that when you click on a bowl or a quesadilla, it looks appealing, it looks delicious. We moved things like earn an order up into a more primary position, so it was clear what we wanted you to click on. And then lastly, to kind of complete the push on the app and loyalty adoption for 2019, we did the 12 days of Poncheros. So it was 12 days of fun promotions, and we had Instagram caption contests. But there were some very specific things like ordering within the app, get free queso on entrees on a certain day. And this also had a pretty dramatic impact on our app and sales. So during the promo, our participation rate doubled versus the prior period last year. We also saw that 47% of new guests made a purchase in the following 2 weeks during this promotion. We also beat our online ordering record, single day record in 1 day when we did 5 times points for the 5th day of Poncheros by 48%. And then we saw a 130% increase in app downloads during this time. So it's all neat, but in total, this is what it did. So overall, if you look at our participation rate, which has a really high correlation to sales growth, we increased our participation rate by 54% over basically a year. During the 12 days of Poncheros, we actually peaked at 2 times the participation rate versus 2018. Our check-ins, the nature of our check-ins also shifted. So before it was 66% that were in store, now it's 55% in store and 28% mobile check-in. So we started to get our guests and our fans more accustomed to multiple ordering channels. Signups increased 50% in the past 6 months versus the same period. And referrals increased, and referral sales more than tripled. So once we had people kind of speaking for us, marketing and saying to their friends, hey, download this app, it was a flywheel effect on some of the referral sales. We also increased unique guests by 38%. Loyalty sales increased by 37%. Online sales are up and have stayed up since then. And overall, this has impacted our AUVs really positively. We've had the best year this year that we've had in years. So that's the case study. Thank you.
Ryan, thank you so much. We have time for questions for Ryan. Over here.
Hi, Brian with Pinterest. Thank you for walking through this and congrats on an awesome year.
Thanks.
You walked through the digital funnel within digital and awareness and consideration being 2 really important variables to that. And knowing app downloads is at the bottom of the funnel, how are you tracking individual partners and showing attribution for each of those when at the end of the day you just want to get that app conversion?
So we had dabbled with some app download campaign, like paying to get app downloads, and had done that, I guess, early in 2019. And the results were okay. I think our cost per download was in the $5 range, something like that. So the shift that we made was, instead of trying to pay to get new users with media, build these campaigns that have referrals and signups and excitement as part of the core, and shift those dollars that we would have spent on buying downloads into promoting a bigger campaign.
What were some of the most successful channels for getting referral downloads, for getting people to refer?
Well, through the app. So one of the things that we did as part of the 12 days of Poncheros was a single day referral campaign, and that drove probably the biggest part of our referrals during that campaign. But it's any number of things. Like, it's this overall approach that is driving more and more referrals. So it's tough to say, like, it's this promo campaign or it's more, loyalty campaigns that we're launching, because we don't have the ability to track where it's coming from at that point, but we know that it's going up the more milestones we have throughout the year.
Since recidivism in an app is sort of one of the key problems, especially for a branded app, so what have you settled on in terms of how you're actually maintaining a degree of recidivism, of return use of the app? Is it a sort of cadence to the program so that they're sort of going in a persistent flow so that people don't really have the opportunity to forget? What's really working? Because that's the key driver that makes the app work, is recidivism.
Definitely. That's a great point. Our cadence is more frequent with different types of programs or messages or programs designed around your behavior. So that we're always staying in front of customers, even if it's one thing that we're doing now is starting to build a customer service approach where we're talking to customers and identifying them as loyalty members, and we're going to proactively go out to the high value, the first customers, and say, hey, thanks for joining. Here's a free burrito, or thanks for coming in 35 times this month. Here's free queso. So
you're doing it on that highly personalized a level.
We are.
Against individual behaviors.
Yeah, we will be doing more of it. We're at probably the step and a half to get to that personalization.
Ryan, thanks so much. That was great.
Thank you.
And man, I learned a lot this morning. There was a lot of detail, a lot to talk about in the roundtables. We're going to move to them, but John's got some announcements for activities first.
I do. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. I am your Julie McCoy.
If you haven't met him, this is John Whitfield.
Hey,
He's our head of revenue, head of sales at MediaPost.
Yeah. How's it going?
And he's the fun guy on the school